And now, so hopefully we'll have a quorum in here in just a minute. So I'll go ahead and start us back off, and I just call upon Senator Anavitarte, who just told me that he's been praying all day. So we should be anticipate a really good one today. Senator
Lord have
Anavitarte.
mercy. Yes, I have been praying all day. Bow our heads. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us all here together. I pray that as we all deliberate our beliefs and our wants and what we all may believe individually is what's best for Georgia and the community, that we have a healthy debate, treat each other respectfully, and hope that whatever we decide to do is in the betterment of the community and the citizens of Georgia. In your name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. We have an agenda, and I'm going to take the liberty. We're going to do this a little bit out of order. I'm going to try to do some of the smaller bills up front. So to start us off, I'm going to call on Representative Thomas for HB 1215. If you come to the table, sir. And just to make sure that we're all working from the same, we're working off of LC 490864S.
That is correct.
Yes, sir. All right.
Thank you. Today I present House Bill 1215, LC 490864S. This is a cleanup bill. Does four things. Section 1, it refines the state charter's school system definition. Section 2, it prevents local districts from prohibiting students from transferring to charter schools during the school year. Section 3, it addresses a loophole in local charter funding calculation. And sections 4 and 5 incorporates a request from the state auditor's office to repeal a requirement related to virtual school performance audits. And that is the bill.
All right. You do have a question, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How you doing? I'm sorry. Is this truly a cleanup bill, or are we doing something different when it comes to charter schools?
It's just a cleanup bill. We're not doing anything different. As you know, a charter school is a publicly funded school, so this just cleans up language.
All right. Mr. Chairman, are there anybody to speak for or against this bill today? Is there a sign-up sheet? I'm sorry.
Yes, I do. Have two people signed up to speak to.
I'm sorry, Mr. Representative. Is anybody against this bill?
Not that have approached me about it. No.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Senator Tippins, is that you, number 2? Oh, Senator Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the student being able to transfer from the regular school or the traditional setting to the charter school during the school year. Mm-hmm. Would you explain that, please? And is it a major problem, or is it confined to 1 or 2 districts, or?
To answer your question, Ms. Senator, I would say that what is driving this has to do more about our parents. So if there's an opening in a charter school and we have a parent that wants to move from a traditional public school to a public funded charter school, making the child wait to the next semester or the next school year versus going ahead and filling that spot, this allows for it to go ahead and fill that spot immediately.
One more question, please.
Yes, ma'am.
I was under the impression that we were already doing this. Or is there a system or a district that will not allow students to transfer during the school year?
Not that I'm aware of. However, I have a couple people to speak to the bill that may be able to answer that question specifically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's number 10? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. So I hope I'm not covering territory I already covered, but following up on a couple of Senator Sims's questions. Now, if a child, is the issue that the schools aren't letting the child move into the spot or the district isn't letting a child move into a newly opened spot at all for the rest of the year? Is that the issue?
I think the problem is, and like I said, we have someone to speak in the bill that specifically really understands the charter school. But right now the issue is there can be fines. The traditional public school system can withhold a student into that program. And also to talk a little bit about parity, you can go from a charter school directly into a traditional public school without a problem. But if you want to flip back, the traditional public schools or in the charter schools, you might not necessarily have that parity. So this is just creating parity between our publicly funded charter schools and our traditional school system.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to figure out if that's an issue of finances. Like, is that why because if I moved, say I go to public elementary school number 1, and I move, in the same system, but it's a different zone school during the year, just regular public schools. I can do that.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
And does probably my money share, if it's after the October count date or whatever the date is, stays with my old school?
Not
But what I'm trying to
exactly.
get at is,
I mean,
is the
QBE
reason
funding
that,
is.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, we don't address QBE funding and how that works in this bill.
So it doesn't have anything to do with the money?
It doesn't address. No, I guess I don't understand where you're going with the question.
What I'm trying to figure out is why, and maybe the other person will be able to address it. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why a student wouldn't be permitted to go, and then that's what made me think. Is it because of they wanted to keep the money at the original school if that child's already been counted for QBE purposes at the initial school? So I was just trying to drill down on what the situation is.
I guess to
that's
me,
that's arising here and there. It sounds like it's not particularly common. It doesn't sound like, but
I guess to me it just comes down to about our parents and what our parents want to do. If our parents want to move their child to charter school, let's just make sure that they have the ability to do that. And I think that's what really the crux of what this is. It's just to ensure that if there's an opening in a charter school, that we can get a parent into that, or I'm sorry, not a parent, we can get a child into that slot.
All right, thank you. We do have a couple, Bonnie Holiday. You signed up to speak to the bill? If you can just come sit at this seat right here, be fine.
Bonnie Holiday. I'm the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Georgia Charter Schools Association, and we support the bill. It is truly a cleanup bill. There's nothing in here that has a fiscal note or changes anything about the way schools should operate or run. To address specifically the questions raised by Senator Parent and Senator Sims, I believe, about the transfer, there is one district in particular that has put into place some local policies preventing students from transferring from a charter school to, from a traditional public school to a charter school after the school year begins. So anytime between, let's say, August and May, no more transfers. When I talked to DOE about this provision, they said, and I've kind of agreed, this may already be illegal, this local policy, but this bill intends to clarify that it is absolutely illegal to put in place such local policies that do that. And it creates some standardization across the state if this were to pop up anywhere else. The schools still have to adhere to all the enrollment policies codified in law with regard to charter schools. You know, that they have to admit students in accordance with various criteria. It doesn't waive any of that. It just says if a waitlist spot comes open in the middle of the year, a student should be allowed to take advantage of it. In some cases, they've been on those wait lists for years.
Thank you. Who's number?
And
Oh, Senator Parent.
thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Holliday. So just to follow up on that, and really I'm just kind of out of a matter of curiosity, like what rationale is that district giving for their decision to try to prevent those
Well, I don't know that that district has anything to do with this legislation, so if we can just keep it on the,
Well, I think it does, because that's why they feel that provision's needed, Mr. Chairman.
I think the local climate probably differs in every case. In this one instance, the charter school has a significant portion of the student body. But when we talk about provisions like this one, keep in mind, charter schools may have 1 or 2 waitlist spots become available mid-year. That's not something that's going to pull 10, 20, 30 kids. So when we talk about budget impact, it's mitigated. The risk is definitely mitigated.
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Senator Navarrete?
Mr. Chairman, at appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Just a moment. Yes, sir. Senator
Ms.
Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, has all the speakers spoke?
No, we've got one more.
Okay.
All right, next we have Roy Spawn. Hope we're not messing that up too bad. If you'll just give us your name and who you're with.
My name is Leroy Spann, the 4th, and I'm with Deep Center from Savannah, Georgia.
All right.
Good afternoon. I am Leroy Spann, the 4th. I'm a 15-year-old from Savannah, Georgia. I would like to address my passionate concern for the charter schools. This bill HB 1215 is very personal to me because I have a learning disability. My disability is APD. APD is a processing disorder for school-age children. Kids with this condition can't understand what they hear in the same way other kids do. This is because their ears and brains don't fully coordinate. So traditionally, schools, even with an IEP and its accommodations, don't always work. Moving to a charter school I was able to get more help in a form of hands-on. Unfortunately, it was a little too late. The current law did not allow students to move in the middle of the year. Me and my mother knew that moving to a charter school around October was the best for me, but it was too late. So then I had to wait all the way till next school year. This had a very bad impact when I had to wait the whole year because I had missed an entire semester of curriculum and I was significantly behind. You may ask, why wait until the middle of the year? Well, sometimes because a good parent doesn't know the capabilities of the classroom settings. In public schools, you have 15 to 20 kids in a classroom. This makes it hard to focus and receive the necessary attention to process curriculums correctly. In a charter school, students have more tailored attention. We are in a classroom around 10 people, and in this space, students with learning disabilities like me may feel more connected to what they're learning and also get the attention that they need to succeed in their educational journey. In order to truly provide equal education to all students, please pass this bill. So this way, when young people have the learning disability struggle in education, they have a classroom to go to, a classroom that is built for belonging and a fair education. In conclusion, pass HB 1215. That'd be all.
Hold on, you have Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spann, you said you're 15 years old?
Yes, sir.
Is your mother here with you today?
Yes, sir. She's right there in the gray, second row.
Okay, well, great. Thank you for being here. So you are speaking in favor of 1215. You think 1215 will not only help you, but people that suffer from APD?
And different learning disabilities.
Okay. Mrs. Spann, thank you for taking time to come here today, sir.
Thank you.
I like the bow tie.
Thank you. All right, we have no other people signed up to speak to the bill.
I can
Would
speak
you
to
like
it better
close?
than that. I think it is closed. So.
All right. All right, and now would be the appropriate time if you'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make a motion. We do pass House Bill 1215 and just read the LC number and make sure we got that right. LC 490864S.
Correct.
I'll make a motion. We do pass.
I have a motion. I have a second. Senator Brass. Any other further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? Like sign? Your bill passes.
Thank you very much.
Next, we will call House Bill 1482. Representative Irwin, if you'd like to come up and present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How are you doing today, sir?
Good, good. Thank you for putting me up second here.
If you'd like to present your bill, go ahead.
Absolutely.
And just to clarify, we are working off of LC 490944S.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That's correct.
go ahead.
If I could, this is a very exciting bill. I'm sure you enjoyed reading all 3 pages of it. It has to do with capital outlay, which is the way the state funds construction for schools. We're going to get more specific into low wealth funding in that capital outlay and project specific in that capital outlay program. And those categories of our capital outlay program were set up for specifically for the low wealth districts. The way the law is currently written is those that can access it are your bottom 25% of the school systems in wealth. And that wealth is determined by the amount of splosh dollars that they generate. So all systems can access capital outlay money. But what we're addressing here and trying to do in this bill is assisting those low wealth districts and giving more access for them to the money. And we're not increasing the money, but we are giving them more access to that capital outlay money. And the way we are doing that, and let me tell you, I should have started with I appreciate the DOE's willingness to work on this together with me to try to improve this access, and their knowledge and their agreement of what we could do with the state of Georgia to assist those systems. Currently, there are 44 school systems in the bottom 25% of those splosh collections, putting them in that low wealth category. Every law we write like this, there's going to be a 45th system. So there's always going to be one. You're going to make $1 too much to be able to apply for this money. However, we looked at it with an option if there was something we could possibly do that would give some the opportunity to get in that list that are the 45th, 46th, 47th, 48th system in the state of Georgia access to this funds. Now remember that we said it was splosh money collections, which is what many systems use to build their schools today. Some of these systems that are in the bottom 25% only would raise $200,000 a year in splosh money in their system. So you could figure over the course of a year at $200,000, there's a possibility of only raising $1 million over 5-year splosh. In today's market, you could not build a school for $1 million, even at a small capacity of 100 kids or 300 kids. So this is very important capital outlay money to school systems that don't have that splosh capability. So how we address the need, what we did was currently, if you receive, you're willing to forfeit 5 years of your splosh money, the state of Georgia would give you enough money to construct the building that you were asking for, that you need, and the square footage and facility needs that you have, which at times can be up to $50 million. If they were to give $1 million, they get $50 million. And then they could then construct the building that they want to construct. Then they access that money. Well, as you can imagine, we met those needs for that system. So they would not need that money for another 10 years. And remember, these are mostly school systems that don't have fast growth. So if they can't access the money for 10 years, but they didn't come off the list of 44 school systems. So what we did was that if you have accessed that money, in this bill, we took you off that list since you couldn't access it again for 10 years. And what we did is allow that 45th system to have access to this money. And we said they had to be on the list 2 of 3 years. Of the next 2 of 3 years, you had to be one of those 45 poorest systems by splosh collection. So that's the first thing the bill does. The second part of this exciting bill was that if you were consolidating schools and you were tearing down buildings, that the building had to be at least 35 years old that you were tearing down and consolidating. The reason is in the market that we build today, the DOE will state that we're building schools for a minimum of 45 years. We're also giving renovation money at 10 and 20 years to renovate. So why would we give so much money to these systems to build these and then in 20 years, 15 years, tear these buildings down? Especially if we had just given you remodification money on that. So those, Mr. Chairman, are the two things that this bill does. I also have the director from the DOE who oversees this process sitting in the crowd behind us. I want to commend Pat Scofield and his work and because there is a lot of good construction going on in the state of Georgia. I personally feel in the nation we have the best school construction plan development laws for in our schools, but you can also ride around the southeast and you would not see nearly the good buildings that we have, and it's due to his department, his good effort, and then what we've put in place not only with SPLOSH but with capital outlay money.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Irwin, for bringing this legislation. So in my area, I don't think I have any counties that would be on that list, but there is one county of major concern for me that currently has a Georgia power plant in the county, and they're going to be winding that down in the next few years, and so it's going to be a large chunk of their tax base and tax revenue that are coming, and really a lot of that's contributing to the SPLOST dollars. So I guess my question is on this list, and maybe this is better for DOE, but is the list updated per year? Are you looking at the previous year's SPLOST dollars collected, or is it collectively over the lifespan of that current SPLOST? I didn't mean to.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, can we allow Pat Scofield, the director at the DOE?
That'd be fine.
Good question, Senator, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Brass. Excuse me.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
Chairman Payne, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Pat Scofield, the Director of Facility Services at Department of Ed. To answer your question, we calculate those numbers, those SPLOST amounts annually. So each June, we get the latest Department of Revenue numbers. So we're basically pulling that in. We roll up once a year all of our data.
So specific question, once that plant closes, and let's say all of a sudden, this county, Heard County, jumps into the list, they would then qualify for what we're doing with this legislation.
If they qualify, Senator, for 2 of 3 years,
it would need to be 2
as
years
we wrote in there, they'd have to be on that list for 2 of 3 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Stay here with me.
Senator Anavitarte.
No, I just want to thank Representative Irwin for bringing this bill forward. I know my school district, I think we're like Paulding County ranked 157 out of 180. I know this has been a topic of discussion even back when I was on the Paulding County School Board. It's been going on for a number of years because of, what I call our 1951 facilities that are just not efficient or not conducive, I think, for, student learning. So I know there will be a lot of school districts that will be happy that this bill passed, and I think the community will be very happy too. So I just want to thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Dolzal? He waves. All right, we have no other questions, and we have no one else signed up to speak to this bill. At this time, I'm not going to let you pray again. So what would be the will of the committee?
Motion do pass.
A motion do pass from Senator Brass.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I had a second from Senator Jackson. Any other further discussion? All those in favor of House Bill 1482, LC 490944S, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed?
I'm voting for it. He distracted me. I was yes.
Oh, you voted?
Can you start over?
The whole meeting or just this vote? Okay, those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those opposed, and 1. Your bill passed and move on.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, sir. And who's carrying this in the Senate?
Well, I would ask Ms. Sims if she was willing to. Quite a few of her systems are covered within this bill, could be beneficial, but it would be to the will of the committee too.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, next we will move on to House Bill 1084. All right, Representative Wade, we have, just to make sure, we're on 1084, and we do have a substitute,
That is correct, sir. Yes.
and that's what we're working off of as the substitute, correct?
Yes, sir. LC 490983S.
Yes, sir.
Very, very minor change, and I can speak to it however you'd like me to, but it was in working with a sponsor of a similar bill, Senator Bo Hatchett, that offered a Senate version of this, and he and I worked together on just taking some of the language that he felt was better, and I worked with him in Legislative Council, so I can go through those lines if you'd like me to. They're pretty easy to point out. It's on page 2.
Okay, and if you would go through the difference in what
Sure.
what's been updated, and also just
Sure.
point out obviously differences between this one and the bill that the Senate passed.
Certainly. So first I want to say thank you for hearing this bill today. And I want to share to the committee here in the Senate, I don't know if you had an opportunity to hear some of the commentary that I provided in testimony throughout the process, but this issue and this topic is one that I have thought about a long time. And I would say that my childhood and my connections to 2 educators who were my parents, my wife being an educator and being a former school board member for 15 years, has actually guided me to be able to speak to and try to find a resolution as it relates to the bigger issue at hand in today's society, and that is the divisiveness of, if you want to call it the far left and the far right, or just the fringe frustrations that may exist that go to bad places, and how that relates to exterior of the school system and trying to make sure that what we're doing is going to protect students first. And so that's the aim of this legislation. And so I can walk through that specifically to ensure that folks know that, and I know there's people that have signed up that are going to speak in favor of this bill, and there are going to be people that have signed up to speak against this bill. But I've worked with all of the, and I mean this affectionately because I've had these initials, but with all the alphabet soup of the education community, whether it be GSBA, GSSA, Gale, Page, GAE, Anti-Defamation League, etc. Several folks have provided input. There were over, I think we're close to 40 iterations now, at least 37 that I can recall to get to the point where this legislation is. And again, it is to ensure that we limit the opportunity for divisiveness to come into the classroom. And for me, that largest divisiveness is based on where we've come in our country, and we want to ensure that race is not something that's used to pit children against each other in the learning environment. It doesn't take away the teaching of history. So I'll walk through a couple of things. First, I want to go to the changes. On page 2, if you'll notice, the definitions of the only divisive concepts are laid out on line 25 through 53. And the changes were in lines F, G, and H as compared to what was passed in the House. And the word solely was added on line 35, so that we would say an individual solely by virtue of his or her race bears individual responsibility for actions committed in the past by other individuals of the same race. In this legislation, that would be deemed a divisive concept. In line 37, I think this one was a very important one that Bo and I worked on with several other people in this room here today representing some of the organizations I just referenced. That we want to make sure that what we're discussing is that the divisiveness would be centered around a student's race, not the teaching of history. The teaching of history is not divisive. We've had extreme divisiveness in the past. And I've got testimony I'm going to give you today that I experienced from a former educator that I think will be powerful. And to me, it makes me realize that we have come to this day, I think, with a bill that meets the concerns of all citizens of all races. But I'll speak to that at the end. In line G, we rephrased it to say an individual solely by virtue of his or her race should feel anguish, guilt, or any other form of psychological distress. I've listened to folks that have shared concerns that children may feel anguish over certain historical events in our history. And I can tell you as a parent of 2 children, a second grader and a kindergartner, my daughter, who happens to go to school in Lumpkin County, Senator Gooch is the senator for that district. I represent Lumpkin County. My wife is an administrator, assistant principal, and is over special needs. And I want to give a shout out to the young man. He definitely spoke extremely eloquently, and I was extremely excited. I sent a text to my wife. You'd be really proud of this young man. He did a fine job. And to me, that's an example of what good education can do, is meet children for the great opportunity that they are. Each of us has incalculable life value that you cannot put a number to it, and children should never be pitted against each other. But there were some folks that said, well, how can you stop children from feeling anguish? And in some cases, they might even have a situation that we don't know of that's happened outside of the school system that could bring on a psychological distress. This entire session, we've had discussion about mental health issues, right? Well, the point of it is that we don't want to encourage children to be pitted against each other, and that somehow that their race should be tied to their requirement to feel a certain way about a certain piece of history. Not that history itself doesn't bring anguish. My daughter came home very upset after hearing and learning about what happened to Rosa Parks. She is a second grader, and that was a part of the Georgia standards. This bill, we are not changing Georgia standards in education. As a former school board member and as a son of 2 teachers and a spouse of one, the educators in this state have a very deep understanding of what their role is in delivering the Georgia standards through curriculum that is designed mostly by teachers in their districts. There are countless detailed accounts of historical wrongs that have happened in the past, even in world history, referencing that of what slave labor was used to build the pyramids, to what happened in Auschwitz and Birkenau, to also what happened in this country during the Civil War, and then even up into the Civil Rights era, and even to what's going on today. So for the span of kindergarten through 12th grade, the teaching of history will not be changed or impeded by this legislation. And I'll point to these lines so that you're aware. If you'll go to lines 76, this theme is repeated throughout 4 times. And this is in the section of the bill, and I think sometimes, like all of us, we're learning. I'm a freshman, I know that. I don't know it all. I've got a wife and a father-in-law that remind me of that often, especially my father-in-law. And if he were here today, he would be nodding his head. That's right, son, that's right. Keep learning. The point is we have gone through an exhaustive effort to ensure that this bill shall not prohibit the following, okay? We're not going to prohibit a school administrator, teacher, or other personnel or an individual facilitating a training program for responding in a professional and academically appropriate manner and without espousing personal political beliefs. This state, as many in the nation, went through a phase in which we were to ensure that people were not able to proselytize their faith in the classroom. And I'm a person of deep faith. But I believe that's reserved for my home, my church. I have friends I go to a synagogue. I have friends that are Catholic. We don't all go worship the same way, but the classroom is not the place to experience that. That's through the home. There were teachers that struggled with that because they did not think that they were doing any harm to students. But through a period of time, through thoughtful training in an academically and professional manner, they learned how to ensure that they were not crossing that line, so that they would continue to teach Georgia standards or other standards across this nation to ensure that children had a good learning environment and were not being indoctrinated to one's faith. I look at the world today and I see a world in which we've got to bring down the temperature of the divisiveness. And to me, this legislation addresses that. It continues on in lines 81 through 83. This bill specifically does not prohibit the discussion of divisive concepts. Meaning if there's a real world event and we're in an AP class, an international baccalaureate class, and we need to talk about what's going on, what are the root causes to the issues in Ukraine today as it relates to Russia? Now, if you're a child in a classroom, and I use Gwinnett County as an example, they have the melting pot. There is probably a classroom in which there are Ukrainian Americans and Russian Americans, meaning people who have immigrated here legally and are in our schools, and I'm certain that they have opinions on either side of that issue. Teachers don't need to teach those issues through espousing their own personal political beliefs, whether they're Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever. To me, that's the place that it should be separate. And this bill continues to ensure that's the case. In lines 84 through 87, we ensure that if it is a part of advanced placement or international baccalaureate classes or dual enrollment, that any of these type of topics are done so, but again, in an academically and professional appropriate manner without espousing personal political beliefs. Lastly, I want to talk to you about some of the concerns I've actually received about an hour before we got here today. And that is, and this is one thing I'm sure that many of the senators in the room, especially those with law degrees, have more experience on, and that's when do you codify something and when do you not? Well, there was some concern that what happens if these incidents happen? And what's the timestamp on it? Well, Page and GAE brought to me their concern that let's say there is an actual situation where a teacher makes a decision to decide to indoctrinate based on their political belief in a classroom, and a parent finds out about it. That's some good news. Wow. Okay.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Is that a sign, Mr. Chairman?
No, let's keep order. Let's keep order. The sound system's still working, so you may continue, sir.
No problem. And I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I want to make sure I cover. I just want to make sure I cover the most recent concerns that were brought to my attention. I was able to avail those concerns prior to here. GAE and Page were concerned that what if a teacher is accused by multiple parents? Well, in the rulemaking that we've, through this legislation, allowed the State Board of Education, the local community will have an opportunity to combine those. The entire intent is to ensure that if an incident happens, there is a diligent and deliberate and reasonable process to allow the parent to be at the table to share that concern. And if it's multiple situations, then those can be done and the school system can decide how to address that. If the parent's concern is not met, then that parent will have a right to appeal to the local Board of Education. The local board would then do their own review of the process. Then they would make a ruling. If and only if at that point in time that parent is still not satisfied that their concern has been heard and listened, they would have an opportunity to appeal that to the State Board of Education. And the State Board of Education would then do their own research. But we're not going to hotlines. We're not going directly to the state board. We're going to allow the local school systems, of which I was a school board chairman. I served 15 years. Most school systems in the state have a similar process. This law will ensure that every school system will have this process to address sometimes these heightened type of issues that come out of divisive concepts that we want to ensure don't happen. To the folks that will say that this is a bill and what's the new catchphrase? This is a no, that's none of the bills are really that good, but they get there eventually. No, this is a problem in search of a solution, or a solution in search of a problem. Folks, I've been around long enough to know that we've got to anticipate. And I had a fellow member really give me this example. The legislative branch should be focused on the now and the future. The judiciary looks at the now and the past, and the executive is focused on the here and now. And for me, this is about getting ahead of, I did provide over 9 different examples of actual incidents that have happened in Georgia schools that relate to divisive concepts entering the classroom. Most of those were individual teachers deciding to do something that was not appropriate. One was a school system that had promoted a specific curriculum that was going to pit, let's put Asian kids in this class, African American kids in this class, white children in this class, and that's just not conducive. And I think parents should be able to raise their hands and call a pause and say, is this really what we want to do in this state? That's what this bill will ensure, that there's a process to address those concerns. But I also think it's our responsibility to look at where we've been and where we're going. And I believe it's important to ensure that children are not pitted against each other based on the color of the skin. And this will be my last comment before any questions. I had a teacher, former teacher of mine, call me. Throughout this process, they've watched it. And it was a history teacher. And I'll be honest, they're not doing very well. They've got cancer and they're fighting. And they were funny. They said, Will, I know you're a Republican. I know your parents. I'm a lifelong Democrat. But I look at what you've done and how you've addressed this issue, and I would only tell you that if you would share my thoughts, maybe some of the Democrats at the table will listen. If you happen to be a person of different color, and you happen to have been under the Zell Miller administration when there were more Democrats in this state, or if we even go back a decade or two before and this bill had been introduced right after we were going through segregation and trying to bring students together, how would we be looking at this from that lens? Because to me, this is about building unity and making sure that children can have the opportunity to succeed in life, to be in a learning environment that is safe and does not allow what I think are very weak-minded individuals that take anger to the nth degree that only builds division. So with this bill, as we have presented, working with Senate colleagues like Bo Hatchett and others, as well as folks like Chris Irwin that you heard before, Brad Thomas before, that really have a sincere belief that every child that's in this room behind me has incalculable value, and they should never be pitted against each other because of the color of their skin. Thank you.
Thank you. You do have some questions. Number 9, is that you, Senator Jackson? Senator Jackson.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Mr. Representative, thank you for being with us today. I just have a few questions.
Sure.
You talked about the General Assembly is about the now and the future. but then you brought reference to the civil rights era,
Oh, yeah.
which you want to go back and talk about the civil rights era, and compare this bill to if this bill was addressed back in the 60s, let's say 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King was brutally murdered. And there's an old statement, and I don't know who said this, but it's just like, if you don't know your past, you're doomed to repeat it. So isn't it true, though, that we have to not only know our past, but we have to understand our past? Because if we don't know our past, we're just doomed to repeat it or keep that same pattern from going on and on. Isn't that true, sir?
That is true, and I believe that because we've not changed Georgia standards and that we've ensured that that language that I highlighted that's mentioned 4 different times as it relates to making sure that teachers know that they can teach, should teach, I believe in a rigorous and a deep way, in an academically and professional manner without espousing their personal political beliefs. Educators in this state are amazing, and they are able to do that. I can tell you that my teachers in my community, I know that today's lens that we look through, we all think in terms of everything seems to be political, but as a student in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, guess what? I didn't know the political affiliation of any of my teachers. It wasn't even a part of the construct of our class. And I think that's something that's changed over the last few decades. Now, I grew up in rural Georgia, so maybe it was different there, but that was my experience. But I believe that what you're saying, the importance of what happened to Martin Luther King, that we should make sure that we address the concerns. And I really thought about this legislation, and how would Martin Luther King want to make sure that there was a process to deal with when children get pitted against each other based on their race? To me, I think he would want to ensure that there was a thoughtful process that was focused from a place of love instead of anger or hate.
Yes, sir. Follow-up question, sir. Yeah. But you do believe in free speech.
Oh, yeah.
And teachers should be allowed to teach the subjects in a way that they can interpret history or our past so that everyone can understand.
And lines 68 through 69, sir, if you'll let me answer that question.
If I could finish up, sir, just a couple
I thought you asked me if I believed in freedom of speech.
Yes, sir. That's a yes or no. But
it's on lines 68 and 69,
yes,
if that can be shown for the record.
But, sir, would you also understand that teaching history is vague, and just because someone teach history don't mean it's necessarily true. Would you agree to that, sir? Well, sir, let me give you an example.
Okay.
We were taught in school. Well, when I was in school, and first let me tell you, I am the product of a mother and father who are both educators.
Is there a question?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. The history is vague and might not necessarily be true, because when I was in school, I was taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Okay, and he discovered a land, and he called the subjects Indians because he thought that he was in India, and we all call them Indians now, and truly they're Native Americans and indigenous people different from the continent of India. But in our history books, we're taught that that is true. So history in our history books, in my humble opinion, is usually recorded by the victor. And whoever write history, record history not necessarily as factual, but in their beliefs. In fact, Winston Churchill once said, "History will record me favorably because I would have written it." So in my humble opinion, I think history, as it's written in certain books, can be vague, but teachers can incorporate true history and interpret that history to students so they can understand not what's necessarily in books, but it's what is factual.
Well, just to the point I think that I understand you're making is that in lines 68 through 69, that we make sure that we are not prohibiting or would inhibit or violate the rights protected by the Constitution of Georgia and the United States or undermine intellectual freedom and free expression. So I think that answers that question. And number two, if you would like to work in the future on ensuring that our Georgia standards cover parts of history, that there is a process I think we should entertain, I'm all for a bipartisan effort to address things that may need to be a part of our Georgia standards that aren't. This bill is not addressing Georgia standards. It's addressing ensuring that we have unity in the classroom. We don't pit children against each other based on race.
Next we have Senator Parent.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I have just a couple questions. My first question is, would it be correct that an exploration and discussion of sanctioned redlining practices by the U.S. government as it relates to African Americans earlier in the past century would be acceptable?
That would be acceptable if that's in our Georgia standards, yes.
Would it be acceptable to talk about, as part of that lesson, that just a couple weeks ago, a Bloomberg analysis found that a certain large bank approved 47% of refinance applications from black homeowners in 2020, but 72% from white borrowers? Would the teacher be allowed to bring that in and discuss that in the context of past state-sponsored redlining?
I think the answer to your question would be is if there is a discussion about banking and there's a discussion about loan approval. So we just worked on personal finance, and I think if there was a reason for a teacher that was trying to compare how some people are declined, I'm happy to have that discussion. And I would even add that we should consider the fact that we have a lot of our state in Georgia that is currently considered rural and underbanked, and as far percentage of people, that number is almost equal African American and white. We have a lot more white people in this state, but that number has changed. And there are a lot of rural Georgians who are of lots of colors: white, Hispanic. I mean, I've got a friend, Marvin Lim, in the State House, who has concerns about his community, and he's of Asian descent. So I would say that if it's about teaching access to capital, that this bill would not put that in harm's way. So you would not be
concerned that, in your estimation, no one should logically take a discussion of unequal mortgage and banking practices, and I could also show you large settlement from 2012 on this same topic.
Right.
No one should, you don't think, take that to mean that they would not be able to discuss it in thinking that it would be a violation of some of these divisive concepts.
No. It would
such
only
as
be a
US is
violation if they were
fundamentally
to
racist.
use that to pit specific children in that classroom against each other. I am a community banker. So let's just say a teacher that isn't credit worthy were to decide that, I did not approve their loan and my child is in their class. If they decided to try to pit my child against another because I did something because of my race.
But
and
we're
somehow
talking about in your bill, we're not talking about that. We're talking about.
Well, you were talking about hypothetical, so I was
I'm
trying
talking
to give you a
about systems.
response.
I'm talking about systems.
Okay, I think I've answered your question.
I don't think you have.
I just told you that you can talk about systems.
Hold on.
I talked about the systems, and I said that teaching of that discussion
I have
respectfully.
Let him answer the question, please.
I did, and I have a follow-up question.
Well, let him answer.
My understanding is you're asking me, can they discuss the disparities that exist in the financial systems in the country?
Yes.
The answer to that question is yes, as long as it does not pit individual students in that classroom against each other based on race.
Okay, thank you. So my follow-up question is, mightn't you think that someone else might misunderstand that actually is allowable? Because we've seen examples in other states where people on nothing nearly as divisive as approvals,
right,
racially disparate approvals, believe that things are in violation of legislation such as this, and they file complaints. How would you suppose it's a two-part question. That's the background of it.
Sure.
I mean, the question I have is, how would you suppose that they would be able to answer it? And then secondly, how does your bill take into account the possibility of people misunderstanding and filing repetitive, frivolous complaints?
So to answer that question, that similar question has come up. The parents are going to have to provide, or if it's another teacher that has a concern about an individual teacher that is going against this legislation, they would have to provide reasonable and verifiable evidence that it would be in conflict with one of those 9 divisive concepts. The principal who will receive the complaint will have the opportunity to review that complaint, and if the parent provides reasonable evidence, then they may rule in favor of the parent. If they don't, then they will be able to sit down with the parent and the teacher and just have a conversation and say, let's talk about what happened. Let's ensure that you understand what this topic is about. It actually is to help bring people to the table. And as I've testified in the past, bring all these parties that have an interest in that child, but making sure the interest of the child is at the center. That's the primary focus. And the discussions that you're having and the issues in those areas, my experience is you're talking about advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and higher level high school coursework. Oftentimes, and too oftentimes, we don't even have parents involved in their students' classrooms at that age. It's a completely separate issue, but I don't believe that we're going to be in a position. To the second part of your question, as it relates to what do you do if you have multiple? So the Department of Education I've already worked on, there will be, and this bill requires them to work on a model of the process. They will have rules that the State Board of Ed will allow for if there are multiple complaints about a single topic, whether that's one individual teacher or a piece of curriculum or a practice or any contemplated thing, that the school board would be able to combine those into one complaint. And once a complaint is heard, it has to be heard within that 1 year. That will be a DOE rule, and they can't come back. Once there's been a resolution, the parent has to accept that resolution. And that's if they want to continue and they provide enough evidence that the state board would actually hear this case, then once that ruling is done, then it's done. There's not you can't come back the next year and try again.
Can I ask one more?
No,
I understand we're short on time.
Senator James. You had Senator James?
Was she finished?
No, I'm not finished. But if the chair says I am, then I am.
Well, you said two questions.
I said-
and you're going about your fourth
Well,
question
actually, I
now,
have
so I'm just-
probably 12 questions, but I was trying to keep it short. Obviously, in the fact that we are low, obviously don't have a ton of time, but I would appreciate being able to ask one more that I have that I think is
And I'm doing my
important.
dead level best to make sure everybody gets heard.
And that's what the process should be, Mr. Chairman. I agree with that.
Number 7, Senator Albers.
Oh, I thought it was.
Oh,
Did I?
Senator
Thank
James.
you, Mr. Chairman. I heard you say that something about Zell Miller in the 60s and all of this. So were you saying that this did not exist then? Because
No, ma'am. The teacher that called me referenced that it's interesting that we live in a divisive age, and she's concerned about that. And she said, I've read your legislation. I've read your final version. I even sent her this final version that I worked on. And she said, had something like this been passed under prior administrations when we were coming out of the civil rights era to ensure that children were not to be pitted against each other based on their race, then this conversation would be much different today. I truly believe, and now there have been people that are in my party and that are in your party that have laughed at me, and some behind my back have made fun of me, and I welcome it. I believe that there is a path for us to end racism in America. There are 40 million human beings on this planet that are living enslaved today. I want to see America lead and try to mend the pains, the suffering of the past. I agree that we need to ensure that we teach the fullness of history, but we can do so, and Georgia educators can do so without pitting children against each other based on their race or laying blame to those children in the classroom today based on the sins of possibly their grandparents or great-grandparents or other ancestors.
well, Mr. Representative of the 9th, right?
That's right.
Okay, it seems that we want the same goals, but the communication line is not open. We wanted to sit down and have a commission to talk about equality and discrimination and those things that did exist back then. Racism is still alive and well. It might be fermented into some other form here and there, but you can ask, it's still alive and well, even around me with sometimes. And I came into the Senate, and they said, "Oh, there goes the Senate." I was the second black female. I haven't been there, so anyway, I know that it's here.
It's unfortunate there is
my
racism from all races. I
Yes.
agree.
But we live in the real world, and it didn't hurt us then to learn the real history. So why are we trying to change things and make our children look through rose-colored glasses, or, what are we trying to fix if it's not broken? If it's something where you need to know what happened then, so it won't happen again. That's just my opinion. I want your view on that.
I appreciate your opinion.
I want your view on that. You think that not talking about it and not seeing it is going to make it go away?
Again, I think the legislation, and I'll repeat myself again, we're going to continue to teach history. Georgia standards need to be taught. And I find this interesting. I've had a few Democrats in the House, I can't speak for the Senate, that have looked at this final version and they've read the non-divisive concepts. And they said, I actually agree with every one of those. I don't think we need to pit children against each other. This will protect every single child of every single race from the fringe divisive ends of the political parties of today, and even these people that are fringe that aren't even a part of political. They just have their own radical ideologies, and they want to find ways to move into our school systems. And I'm not going to stand by and let that happen. And that's my point. Thank you.
All right, Senator Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been very generous. I believe this is the fourth meeting that we've had questions and testimony past the Senate version of this bill. And based on that and timing, I move the previous question.
All right, move to the previous question. Second. Senator Albers, Senator Antarctic, you second.
I'll second.
You second?
Senator Jackson?
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I have but since we can't have any questions to the author, but my question is to you, Mr. Chairman. The author of this legislation talked about history and talked about the if this legislation was passed in the 60s when we was going through civil unrest, and that teachers would embrace this legislation. And Mr. Chairman, I find that kind of unusual, because in the 60s, we talked about we should all be one people, when the teachers then, after they ring the bell, the young black boys and the young black girls go to a different bathroom than everybody else, or they go drink out a different water fountain. But it says we should be taught that we're not different and that we all should be together. But also, when we read our history books, when I was a young kid and reading our history books, when we talk about the Tulsa massacre in 1921, it's in the history books, it was civil unrest. The Rosewood massacre in 1923 was talk about civil unrest. The East St. Louis massacre in 1917 was talk about civil unrest in classrooms, and it wasn't talk about African Americans being killed and slaughtered on the street, and nobody was prosecuted. So when we talk about civil unrest in history books, and people of color were killed, and teachers teaching about civil unrest when the truth is something else, we have to look at where we are in our history book, and what we have to look at what is written in our history book and what is actually the truth. And we should allow teachers to tell students about American history, because American history is hard. And this is not slavery, because that's a whole nother different day. This is about what happened after slavery.
The truth of the matter is world history is hard.
World history is hard.
And
World history is
to
hard.
include ours.
Right.
And so this is, I think, we've got to call the question, but, to go back in and start debating what's happening throughout world history, I think that's getting off subject.
Yes, sir, but I just want to make this one other statement, Mr. Chairman, to bring it all home. A couple of years ago, 4 years ago, in this body, we passed a resolution talking about Runaway Negro Creek, a little creek down in Savannah, Georgia, called Runaway Negro Creek, and it talked about, history books talked about people, enslaved people running away from an establishment. when actually they was running toward freedom. So history books record African or enslaved people running from something, and it's recorded in our history books. But people of color was not running away from something. They were enslaved. They were in search of freedom. So all throughout history books, it's recorded wrong. And at some point, we have to talk about true history. And we have to give our teachers the freedom of expression to talk about true freedom of true history in Georgia. I know it's tough and it's rough, but we have to understand, because I said earlier, if we don't understand our history, we're doomed to repeat it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion.
What is that motion?
I motion that we table House Bill 1084 LC 490983S.
We have a motion to second the table. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor of tabling, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chairman.
Conduct for the second time this way. We're on camera, so you don't need a roll call vote.
Well, they don't usually pan, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay, well,
And it is in the Senate rules. With a third of committee members, you have to take a roll call
well,
vote.
we'll just raise our hands in total count. So we have
Okay,
three
but that
for
does violate
it.
the Senate rules.
Excuse me. 3 for it. Those opposed to tabling the bill? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 opposed. Now back to the underlying question on the table. You call it.
Move the previous question, do pass.
Are we not taking any public testimony?
We have a motion on the table.
Well, then I have a statement for discussion.
Okay. then- We have a motion and a second on the table. Do pass.
How many people signed up to speak?
Yes, we did have some people sign speak up, and and I would just ask if those that are signed up to speak. I'm sorry.
How many signed?
We have not that many, nearly as many as we did in our last meeting through 202. I mean, when we were, not 202, when we were going through our bill and our Senate bill we've got maybe, what are we, a third of how many people signed up then to sign to speak up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Speak on this.
12 people opposed and 2 in favor. So if I would just ask those who are opposed, if you would like, please just stand up for the record.
But we need to know who they're with, Mr. Chairman.
Can they speak on it? Can we allow them to speak, Mr. Chairman?
No, we don't have time for that. We're going to have to move on. So we have Jalen Connor, Harrison Tran, Maybelline Pelly, DeAndre Gates, Cicely Harsh Kenor, James Wilson, Giovanni Serrano, Abby Fuchsman.
Yep, so you're not letting us speak? Do I have that right? I'm sorry.
We don't have time, but he's called the question, so we're moving on.
Our young people drove from Savannah, Georgia to speak on this bill. Because they are the students. There has to be. He likes to do talk the whole time about how he felt. I feel like we should.
A point, I'm letting you have be recognized. That's what we're doing now. I need you to keep order. Cindy Battles, People's Agenda, Terrence Wilson, IDRA, Margaret Cicerelli, Jordan Madden. Those are in opposition. Those people in favor to speak to the bill were Mike Griffin and Taylor Hawkins.
Excuse me, I've been a resident of Fulton County for 23 years.
Excuse me, ma'am.
I don't understand how somebody who can speak for so long about the way the bill was written, and people who have comments, who've been citizens, who pay taxes every year, and lots of them, cannot speak about my concerns over this bill.
Because he has to present his bill to this committee for this. Excuse me, ma'am.
You've already cut people off who are on your
I need you to be quiet. All right, the question has been called.
Discussion, Mr. Chairman?
We've had discussion. That's what we've been doing for.
No, usually you allow.
He called the question earlier, and we had discussion. Now we've moved on to the vote.
I wasn't recognized for discussion.
You were recognized for discussion. I went from you to her, back to him, and then moved
Those
over
were
to.
questions of the author, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry?
Those were questions of the author. That wasn't committee discussion.
The motion is not debatable.
Not debatable. Look at the rules.
Well,
So-
you're allowed to ask for a roll call vote under our rules as well.
Once a motion is made, to call the question, you have to call the question.
So those in,
That's how you want to run it. Have at it.
That's the rules, Senator.
Well, he violated the rules earlier.
so those in favor of HB 1084,
I also have an amendment, by the way,
Yes.
which you should be able to do after the bill's passed, because I found a typo.
1084 LC 490983S.
That is correct.
They were on the floor.
All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? 1, 2, and 3. Thanks, sir. Your bill will move on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
I have these for
it.
you from Representative Drenner. These are all of our constituents that tried to give you a petition a while ago. Yeah, I have an amendment. Yeah.
This.
That was
Yes, we did the sub.
Ignore them. No, they don't care. They don't care. No.
That's the number I read off. Yes, I passed it on. Do it? Yeah, a little. Next, we will move on to House Bill. Let's get order back, please. We still have further business to do. We got House Bill 681. Representative Yurda.
I'm not.
Always.
Georgia students will remember you. Do you understand that?
Excuse me. We are having a meeting.
I don't care. This is the second time you've done this to me. To all the students here, Georgia will remember you for this.
I do believe you spoke at my last meeting. All right. How are you doing, Representative Yurda?
I'm doing well, Mr. Chairman.
All right, you're bringing today House Bill 681, and I believe you got a substitute.
That's correct, sir.
And just to make sure that we have the LC number down correctly, it's LC 490928S.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right.
Thank
Please
you, Mr.
present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for giving me the opportunity to come before you today. I present to you House Bill 681. This is to provide a mandatory course of instruction in financial literacy in the 11th and 12th grade. And this would not begin until the year 24-25 school year. And this would require the State Board of Education to establish content standards. You know, financial literacy is so important to us today. This course will aid students in how to open checking accounts, balance their checking accounts, how to avoid overdraft fees, personal budgeting, and you know, even comparing various lenders, comparing banks, credit unions, payday lenders, even pawn shops. So it would be very important in instruction on how to avoid scams, fraud, and even identity theft, which is such a problem today. Also, it would provide instructions on completing and reviewing tax forms, how to fill out a 1040. I just had a representative today come to me and said that one of the teachers in his district explained to him that she had many students trying to come to her, trying to help, you know, fill out a tax return, and they didn't, you know, they had no idea how to do that, and she was trying to help them with that. Certainly cryptocurrency, that's a big thing today, instruction in that. credit worthiness, FICO score, and the importance of a good credit rating, how important it is, credit is to things like insurance rates, even securing a job, not only just securing credit. People with poor credit scores often pay thousands of dollars more a year just because they don't have a good credit rating. It would also include life insurance, property insurance, health insurance, post-secondary education, how to finance that. We all know student debt now even exceeds credit card debt. So, you know, I can see instruction to help people decide how to finance college, whether to work, whether to go into debt, whether maybe to go to a community college for a little bit less money. The goal in this bill is to provide flexibility. I had a bill last year. It was a little more rigid. It actually outlined the course curriculum, but this actually gives more flexibility to the State Board of Education to design the course and gives more time for the school boards to implement the course. Right now, 0% of students are guaranteed access to financial education. The state of Florida just implemented a standalone financial literacy bill, and I think 11 other states also have that. So knowledge, you know, and financial literacy will really help build, I hope, generational wealth, which, you know, some families have not been able to attain. We really want to set up our students for financial success in the future, and I think this is a great way to do it. I've had very positive comments on the bill. The original bill last year passed, I think, almost unanimously in the House. I think maybe 2 votes against it, but very well received. As a matter of fact, I had a chairman of one of my committees call me one day. He said there was a group of ladies there at the Capitol, actually from the junior league, that were interested in my bill and wanted me to come down and talk about it. So I've had.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to move do pass.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, do pass. Any other discussion? I hear none. All those in favor do pass, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3,
Thank you for
4, 5. And your bill will move on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Y'all
sir.
have a great day.
Demetrius, can you come up and be very fast? Sorry about the time, but he's got to leave and we need his vote, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, we passed this bill several times in the past. Great bill. Motion do pass.
In a second, I got a motion in a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? None. Good job, sir. We call this meeting adjourned.